Sebastopol City Council to order. Please silence or power off electronic devices so we're not disturbed. We don't have anything other than one item on our agenda, but before we do that, we will note that all of us are present with the exception of Councilmember Dieter. And we will have the salute to the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have no proclamations or presentations. We have no minutes to approve. But we will, of course, as always, accept public comment on any item not on tonight's agenda. If anybody wishes to speak, please come forward. There will be a 3-minute time limit, and please state your name for the record.
Yes, Thomas Morbillo, Sebastopol. Hello, everybody. I'm here to talk about the Andy Lopez Task Force presentation, which unfortunately I was unaware of the meeting that you already had and they've already presented. But anyway, I'd like to make a few comments about it. First, I'd like to read you a recommendation. This is recommendation 6.3. The Advisory Committee recommends that among their characteristics, the civilian review boards created should have budgetary independence, separate office locations, conduct independent investigations, have the power to compel police officer testimony, provide an appeal process, and report directly to elected officials and the community in open session. This is from Community Concerns About Law Enforcement in Sonoma County from May, the year 2000. This book is full of recommendations, not one of them implemented. And this was done after shooting deaths. And this is from 2000. 15 years later, here we are in the exact same place, I guess probably worse, I'm sure, and nothing's changed. Now, the key difference there in their recommendation was, in the new recommendation, the sheriff has to agree to the oversight. There can't be how can you oversight somebody if they can tell you, no thank you, I don't want your oversight. If every one of the recommendations that this task force has made was in place a year and a half ago, nothing changes. Andy Lopez is still dead. The reason the task force was put together was to avoid these situations. No behavioral change is being asked from law enforcement, none. Maybe to de-escalate instead of escalate a situation when you come upon it. No. There's, I'm running out of time, I'm sure, but I'll jump ahead. I'm just trying to say that this issue is worth much more time than a half-hour presentation and, thank you for doing a good job and the report looks beautiful. We have serious problems in Sonoma County. We need serious solutions, not fluff, not we're going to enhance the law. What does enhance law enforcement? Sure, everybody wants to enhance anything, but what does it actually mean? A couple of things I'd like you to comment on would be that it should not be that the sheriff has to volunteer to undergo oversight. They're waffling on the name of the Memorial Park. In the beginning it was Andy Lopez Memorial Park, and it was such a beautiful thing. They're beginning to waffle on that. They don't want to name the park after Andy. Was that my beep?
Yes.
Yes, that was it. I'm sorry you missed the presentation. It was rather thorough, and there were a lot of questions from folks in attendance. And of course, the minutes will indicate all that. But I'm sorry you missed it.
I did watch the video.
Very good.
Lee Morbido, Sebastopol, and I too am sorry that I wasn't at the last meeting. I think that that presentation was one of the best kept secrets of the Sonoma County Law Enforcement Task Force that I know of. I've been attending those task force meetings regularly, and it was a big surprise to me when the presentation to you was over. And I talked with them about it. It was really disappointing that they're not publicizing that more, because I wanted to come and talk to you too. You know, I don't know how much time there's left for the Sebastopol City Council to read those recommendations or to hear other points of view on it. You know, there's two grassroots organizations in this county. One is called JCAL, J-A-C-L, and the other one is called SCOOP, S-C-O-O-P. I am not affiliated with either one of them, I just know of them. And both of them have been very involved in the task force, and one of them has even prepared a PowerPoint presentation to give the grassroots people's point of view on this. And I would really hope that there would be time that maybe you guys, maybe as a group, as a council, or individually, contact them just to hear the other side, you know, just to hear the people's recommendations on this. And if there's not enough time, which there may not be, I would hope that you would be able to individually, as city council members, as citizens, maybe email the task force, or actually go to the task force website and put your comments in. I watched the video too from the meeting, and I think you had some very good points about mental health, that I think that it would really be good for them to hear that. Yeah, so if you could do that, that would be really good. And you know, one thing that I wanted to say also is that, you know, there's a dead kid. He's 13 years old, and he's not the only one. This is horrific, horrific. And you know, I think we should never, ever say anything that could be mixed up, that could blame the child for his death. And I just wanted to read this this was in the PD a couple weeks ago. It was an Associated Press report. The Cleveland mayor apologizes for blaming boy for his own death. Cleveland's mayor apologized on Monday after the city's lawyers suggested in court documents that a 12-year-old boy who had a pellet gun when he was shot by police died as a result of his own actions. Mayor Frank Jackson said the city's response to a federal lawsuit filed on behalf of Tamir Rice's family was poorly worded and offensive. We used words and we phrased things in such a way that was very insensitive, the mayor said. The court documents filed late last week by the city said Tamir's injuries and the subsequent complaints for damages stemmed from his actions and failures to exercise due care and avoid injury. It similarly said the injuries, losses, and damages cited by his relatives in the complaint were directly and approximately caused by their own acts, not by the city. I don't usually get this shaky when I'll stop. But I usually get this shaky when I'm talking, but this is like so horrific to me. And this is Sonoma County, and I think we really have to be way more proactive than the task force is moving forward with. And so I thank you for any comments that you would give to the task force.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak on items not on tonight's agenda? All right, we'll close public comment. I saw that conference out there. Are there any statements of conflicts of interest by anybody on the dais this evening? Seeing none. We'll move to item number 1, which is discussion and action for proposed housing element. And we first visited this update on March 3rd and had some discussion and some questions. And so it was requested that we bring this back for further discussion once council members had an opportunity to study the item a little bit more in depth. So if we could have a brief staff report, I think we're all probably pretty up to speed on it, but please, for everybody.
Yes, very brief. Under state law, the housing element is supposed to set the stage for housing development. So to create appropriate zoning and development policies and programs to allow housing to occur. The city's not obligated to actually build housing itself. The proposed draft element has gone through a review process with the General Plan Advisory Committee and the Planning Commission, and as presented before the Planning Commission and the City Council, it does more than meet minimum state requirements. I looked at a few other jurisdictions' housing elements after the last meeting, and the first several that I looked at looked like all they were trying to do was meet state law. They didn't contain, it appeared to me, any unique policies or changes to city procedures or regulations, whereas our draft element does. It has very specific policy ideas and initiatives intended to change policy and facilitate housing. One of the discussion items last time was about the language. To what degree should policies say shall as opposed to should, or review, or will amend, that kind of language. In this kind of document, generally speaking, having some flexibility in language is appropriate. Many details need to be worked out on exactly how a particular general policy statement is going to be implemented in the zoning ordinance. We gave the example of the tiny house policy to create standards and policies for tiny houses, but the element itself doesn't define what that is. There'll need to be a detailed discussion of what the parking requirement is for tiny houses. Are they treated differently in terms of impact fees or density? How big can a tiny house be? So that's just one example of why it may be appropriate to have language that gives the city some room to move and flexibility to look into particular ideas, but in some cases maybe not make an absolute commitment to those revisions in the future. But hearing the discussion that the council had last time, the staff report does have a dozen or so different ideas that if there was interest on the council in kind of strengthening the policy statements of some key proposed language, to be a little more directive and saying that we are going to modify the zoning ordinance to reduce parking requirements instead of saying we will review that. We have some language here along those lines, and the council may have some other specific revisions that you may have. So really, we're just here to hear the council's direction. As we discussed last time, if there is a policy addressing a particular area that is in the draft element, that means the General Plan Advisory Committee and the Planning Commission both considered that. So you can change the language relating to that policy, change the policy itself, because that subject matter was in front of the Planning Commission. If you come up with an entirely new policy, then probably that's going to need to go back to the Planning Commission before final action by the council. That's a requirement in the municipal code. So we're hoping that there are many policies in this draft element, good policies addressing a wide range of issues. There's a lot of room to make changes if the council wants to do that. But we're hoping we don't have to go back to the commission. We are up against a state deadline for adoption, and if we don't meet that, then we'll be subject to a rapid update cycle that will, is undesirable. So with that, I'll stop. Ben Ritchie is here, if you have questions for him.
Are there any questions?
Thank you to our planning director for your report. I just have one question on the recommendations you've included to strengthen the language. And it is in the next to last part, this is page 3 of the staff report, where it talks about section 6, page 16, action G17, and you have 3 points there. The last one being about requiring setback for increased numbers of stories on buildings that could go up to 4 stories in the downtown core. So I just wanted a little more information about setback. Would that apply to the 3rd and 4th stories? Was the conversation about 4th story only? Or if they're, and what are you saying more specifically about 2nd, 3rd, and 4th stories in setback?
Yeah, I think the implication is for the increased number of stories. So right now in the downtown, you can have 3 stories. So for that next story, that would be my kind of interpretation of that language. Certainly the council, if you wanted to say something about the 3rd story as well, you could do that. But I think it's for the increase in as compared to current standards. And the idea is that greater height potentially creates more visual urban design issues, and it may be appropriate, probably is appropriate, to have some kind of setbacks. Exactly what those are would be worked out in the zoning ordinance process, so we're not trying to specify what those parameters are.
Right, so I'm hearing you say that applies to story number 4, because that's the story that has the increase.
In the downtown, yes,
Okay,
and in the
thanks.
general commercial, it would be the 3rd story, because that's 1 story above the normal height limit for that zone.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Glass?
My question is exactly what is our policy right now for granny units or second dwelling units that are not separate units, but that are within existing housing stock?
Those may not need to go to the design review board if they don't involve exterior changes. So it's something that's just one form that a granny unit can take. It can be an entirely separate structure. It can be an addition to the existing structure, or it can be by converting a portion of the existing structure. And certainly all those things happen in Sebastopol. People have done all 3 of those approaches.
And is that ministerial right now within the size definition?
I would say pretty much. I think there is some language in the zoning ordinance giving some architectural discretion, but there really isn't much to talk about when we have had these projects where there's literally no change to the outside appearance. They're just doing interior wall changes.
And what are, for those kinds of conversions, what's the size limit? And what kind of fee structure are we looking at?
The size is the same for all second dwelling units, 840 square feet. So whatever they can do within that is the limit. And your second question was? The fees. It depends on the square footage of the unit and the number of bedrooms. We had one recently that I think was maybe about the maximum, and I think the impact fee total is around $20,000.
And to expand on that, the fees are wide and varied. There's school impact fees when you add bedrooms to any residence, additional bedrooms to any residence, and those, the city has nothing to do with, we have no control, and those are paid to whichever school districts you are located in. And other fees are things like sewer hookup fees or new water line hookups, and those are obviously not a revenue source for the city, those are just simply reimbursement for the cost of the living. Are there any other questions?
In the number of units that we're looking to provide, there's 120, a number that's required by the state. When that number comes up against our growth management ordinance, which I believe is 25 units a year, and this plan's for 8 years, is that correct?
Yes.
So that's 200 units, which are, the growth management ordinance allows for within the time frame of this document. And those roll over for 2 years. So a maximum of 50, or does 2 years roll over into the third year? So is it 50 or 75, that's the maximum to be built?
50.
50. And we just changed that in 2014 from 3 years to 2 years?
Just a couple years ago.
Yes. So, do we already have, we currently have 3 stories allowed?
Yes.
Are there any setback requirements for third stories currently?
No.
So they are the same as first and second story?
They could be, I mean, they are subject to design review, so, you know, and if there are issues, but sometimes there are, neighboring properties, shadows, view impacts, those can come up in the review process, and the board could require changes if the applicant hasn't addressed them.
No other questions? At least right now? Okay, then we'll hear from the public. If anybody would like to speak on this topic, please come forward, state your name for the record, and there's a 3-minute time limit.
Good evening. My name is Claire Durso. I'm been a resident of Sebastopol for some 43 years now. Moved here in 1972 with my husband. I also work at the Village Bakery, so you may recognize me. I may have even made it up with some of you nice people. I work at the Barlow, which is a great place. I'm glad it's there. My home is situated on Hurlbut Avenue, at 713 Hurlbut Avenue, which is adjacent to the Gravenstein North Apartments, which is a Burbank housing development. And at the time of my husband and I purchased the property, it was in the sphere of influence, and over the years, of course, that's changed, along with a lot of other things in Sebastopol over 43 years. And I read in the paper and hear different places that the affordable housing is a problem. I figured maybe this was a good opportunity for the city of Sebastopol to reincorporate the property into the sphere of influence and possibly, I'm not too well aware of how everything works within the city. I don't think you build houses, but maybe that would be a good additional, it's 2 acres, it's all level. Maybe a good potential for badly needed affordable housing could be considered, similar to maybe the one that was over near the Catholic Church called Sequoia Village. I think that was like on a 2-acre parcel. And every year, those 2 acres seem to get a little bigger for me. And I also realize that it may be prudent for me to someday downsize and move on with my life, because it was fine when we were young. We used to harvest many tons of apples, but it's getting a little harder all the time to maintain it, and I don't like to have a sloppy piece of property. So I just wanted to voice my opinion, and I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Bill Cole, 497 Pleasant Hill Road. I live in the sphere of influence, and 2 lots over from the city limits. And I just want to start early on that, you know, I'm I was vice president, acting president of the Autumn Senior Social Club, and belong to a lot of the social groups that have a lot of seniors in them that live within the city limits of Sebastopol and also just outside the city limits. And there's a natural progression. People like Claire, a good friend of mine from the Art and Future Society. We date back to around 1929, right, Claire? That there's a great need for housing in terms of single-level affordable housing or otherwise for seniors that want to downsize, and that becomes a natural progression. You're not having to build the new big monstrosities on Litchfield that you find on Litchfield, because we have a lot of seniors that are living in these big houses that, like Claire, for 43 years, that are looking for opportunities where they can move into smaller housing. I've had one senior for many years that has said, keep an eye on Sequoia Village, Bill, because I'd like to move there if something ever comes up for sale, but I don't know that anything ever comes up for sale in Sequoia Village. So Claire's property would be perfect for a tiny housing concept and a co-housing, because you could keep the main house as a social hall and a meeting room, and there's a lot of room for more units than was built at Sequoia Village. So just want to early on let you know that I'm going to be monitoring this for my senior groups and advocating for housing, affordable housing, particularly geared at the seniors, because as they move from something like I did, I downsized from 2,000 square feet to 300 square feet, and now I'm becoming an expert. I'm living in something similar to the size of a tiny house. Or an apartment or something like that. So I'm going to be monitoring that, coming to the city council meetings, and just advocating that that's where you put your emphasis, rather than build an emphasis on the level of units that you have. Well, we've got 25 housing units that we could build, or 15 actually is what's in the plan right now. And those housing units, if you could put your energy towards building the smaller single level access, and like in Claire's case, consider moving the sphere of influence. I was here 20 years ago in some when they were doing the urban growth boundary, and we went through all of those even before Kenyon. And we shrunk the ultimate city limit by a third. There's infrastructure in place, partially in those areas, where you can move that urban growth boundary very easily and address housing issues without having to go up, because I did live in San Francisco many years at a 3rd-story walk-up and a 4th-story walk-up. I'm on a 2-story now, and that's just about enough to keep me active and fit. But for the senior group, I think you need to really look and focus in on one-level housing, smaller units, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom studios, affordable housing, and that'll create a natural flow where it'll free up these houses. I've friends that live in 2,000, 3,000 square foot houses by themselves. The house is getting to be too much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, Judith Ann, Montgomery Road. I'm so happy to have been preceded by Claire and Bill, because I too have come to ask you to do everything you possibly can to fulfill this category of low-income or affordable housing, since this is a clear split that our county is losing people because of the housing and the rental and the payment costs. Everybody from former mayors and planning commission folks who are looking unsuccessfully for housing to those of us, myself included, who've had a home in Sonoma County foreclosed. Everywhere you turn, the conversation is of people being desperate. In Oakland on Saturday, I ran into someone whose the place she lived in for 15 years had been bulldozed because somebody called the PRMD and it wasn't up to code. And I realized that your purview is the city, but there must be some way that the cities can weigh in on an out-of-control agency, which PRMD really is. Anybody who's dealt with it is aware of the fact that it's crazy making. So the sort of basic things that can be used that make sense is all of the green ways we have. So hooking into a sewer is perhaps not necessary. Energy requirements, perhaps not what they used to be. Everything is shifting, so to be able to incorporate green thinking is what we need. And also in social evolution as well, we're understanding that singles don't do well regardless of what age, but certainly in advanced years. And so it makes sense socially, economically, culturally, spiritually, however you'd like to look at it, to design ways that people can live together, not be necessarily all seniors, so to have mixed in all ways. Diversity is always the healthiest, whether it's flora and fauna or people. So to be able to advance your thinking by engaging members of the community who have lots of brilliant leading edge ideas on this, to be able to design and implement this housing ASAP, because it's as critical as it gets for all of us who want to stay here. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak on this? Okay, we'll close public comment. Discussion? Additional questions? Oh, I have a question that was raised during public comment. And that is, what is the procedure for the inclusion of a property into the sphere of influence?
That is the next big policy topic for the GPAC, the land use element. And will definitely be a topic discussed then, so that's where that initial talk will occur.
So how does that, what does the mechanism look like? What does the procedure look like for making a modification?
The GPAC may recommend modifications to the sphere of influence, and then that's incorporated into the preliminary draft general plan, which moves on up to the commission and then the city council. If the council were to approve a change to the sphere of influence, then the local agency formation commission, LAFCO, also has to approve such an amendment. There are there's at least one property owner who's come to the GPAC early on to request that they be taken out of the sphere. They don't want to be in it. And there's other people out there that may want to be included. So the GPAC will talk about all of that. And it's helpful to hear identification of specific properties, like the one we heard of tonight. We'll note that for the GPAC.
What is the interface between the sphere of influence and the urban growth boundary?
They're the same thing in Sebastopol. Once the sphere was adopted in the last general plan, the urban growth boundary basically locked that into place by voter initiative. So they can be different, but in Sebastopol, they're basically the same thing.
So would the urban growth boundary need to be revised? Should the sphere of influence be revised?
That's another issue for initially the GPAC to talk about, because it had a lifespan. It will expire, I think, next year. So there may be interest in renewing that or not, but the advisory committee will talk about that issue and then on up to the commission and council.
Okay. The existing or new general plan, the question is generic. Does that take into account sphere of influence properties?
It does, well, it identify them, and I think there's acreage numbers and what's called pre-zoning. So it plans for likely or potential annexation at some point in the future, so that it may say this area is appropriate as light industrial, or that area for medium density residential. So there is thought evaluation that occurs in the general plan process. You know, if we were to bring these properties in at some point in the future, what should the land use be, what should the density be? And there should also be some evaluation of infrastructure issues. There are some properties that are difficult for the city to serve. And so they may not really be very good candidates for incorporation into the sphere. There are others where it would be, that there aren't such issues.
So any of the numbers that are in the housing element that's before us tonight, those numbers of housing can be supported by properties that are currently within the city limit?
Yes. And if in the life of the housing element, the city approved an annexation, a housing development, let's say, those numbers would count for our housing element.
Okay, thank you. Questions, discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I want to thank all of us for coming to a special meeting, our consultant and staff as well, to give us a chance to look at this. So I want to tell you, I'm prepared, I've read everything, and I'm not exactly organized in my comments. And I thought it was important to share with you, what should I say, the lens that I was using as I read this. And considering 4 main topics or points. First, our demographics, as I know them from being in the community, living here for 40 years, and reviewing the document. When we're looking at a significantly aged population that may have less need for space and more need for community, that would include people within our city. And I know there are many people in the West County who want to downsize and come here to smaller housing. I think smaller housing is the biggest need we have. So for me, I was reviewing this looking for policies and priorities that would move us from a McMansion sort of history. I think Bill Cole said the reference the property on Litchfield that used to be the horse pasture, to opportunities that are more around 1,000 square feet, smaller, all the way down to this concept that is often repeated here, the tiny home, which is sort of a marketing name for a very special type of housing. So I was thinking beyond tiny home to, small home, something under 1,000 square feet. And I was also looking at something that would provide for our residents independent living that could go to partial sort of transitional housing to assisted living, because I think that's another great need that I've heard for years, that people who've lived here all their life are having to go to Santa Rosa to find this sort of housing facility that will allow them to age in place in their community. I want to talk to you about something important to me, which is that our housing element also address the needs of our government for population and spending and a vital economy, so that we can have revenue to the city to keep going. So I was again recalling housing in the downtown core, particularly where we could have people who were able to walk around. We could potentially relieve our streets of traffic with housing that would not compel a lot of individual cars and parking, and potentially facilitate public transportation. And then I was thinking the fourth lens or factor was affordability, so that we could have that diversity of residents that I think provides us the richness of culture that we enjoy, so that we don't continue to move into an exclusive bedroom community, but rather move into the smaller, or continue to stay with the more diverse community and a greater range of housing choices, so that we could have more different people and more different opportunities for more people, and build our population potentially beyond the projections that are in the report. So as I went through reading this kind of chapter by chapter, I was taking my own measure. Are these elements in there? Are we addressing our demographics as we go from an aging population to then the next group behind the boomers who are going to age up? Are we meeting our needs, a community need for smaller housing? Are we looking at what our government needs in terms of promoting our local economy, and are we also making sure we are addressing the affordability issue? So I'm going to try and organize my comments about that, and I don't know how you want to go through the document, Mr. Mayor, because
I was
we
hoping
have a
somebody
lot
would
here.
have a suggestion.
Well, my suggestion was going to be sort of chapter by chapter, only because that might be easier for me, but and perhaps others want to make some kind of introductory comments, as I have as well, to share how you're reading this and what are the priorities that we each sense from the community, seeing how those are reflected in the work of our community committee, the GFAC.
All right. Councilmember Glass?
Thank you. Well, I have a number of comments, and I do think that the suggestion by Councilmember Kearney that we perhaps go through this chapter by chapter after we're done with our preliminary comments, that we can go through chapter by chapter if we have questions or suggestions about specific things within the chapters. I think that would be a good idea. But before that, I want to put in my 2 cents. So I would like to echo the comments of Councilmember Kearney and the comments of people in our audience. And if you look at our demographics, we are an aging community. And I keep calling us we're the hip Oakland. We're the cool Oakland. We have more fun. But we need to be accommodating the needs of our aging demographics. And I think a number of us know of some friends that have had to move out of town recently because they need a facility that's something like a life care facility that starts out with small housing and then something that has some more assisted living, and then finally like something, what is available to people when they have medical needs. So, having policies and identifying some sites for something like that in the long run, I think is a good idea. I don't think we have to do that tonight, but I think that's a worthy goal. I think that we do need the ability to have some build smaller units on smaller lots that are single floors, as Mr. Cole mentioned. I think there's a big demand for many people who already live in town that need to downsize to something that is a 1 or 2 bedroom house with a single car garage on a small lot, and that is a single floor. I think that we could be densifying from within if we can step up our game on our granny units and really put some grannies in it. And hopefully think about turning some of these really large homes that we have that are that many people, such as myself, live in, that we may, well, I write, as I've mentioned at other council meetings, I actually live with 3 roommates since my husband passed away. I have 3 roommates, and what I'm doing is providing basically affordable housing for a number of people that live with me. And I think enlarging on that paradigm is a good idea. So this isn't the kind of program that we can actually put necessarily in a housing document, but I think we can look at as a city, trying to participate in the kind of program that they're having in Petaluma, which is a senior house share program that somebody in the back of the room drew my attention to. I think we should be, as a city council, we should be encouraging the county to fund a large-scale program like that, where we can help with finding roommates, particularly for seniors, within our existing housing stock, for people who live in big old houses and that are looking to share their space. But most of all, I think the housing opportunity sites that we do have, we should really try to focus more on building smaller units that are single floor. We should try to densify it from within by having our more shared space in the large houses where people, there's a lot of people who are empty nesters now that may want to age in place, but maybe look for sharing some of their space. I think we also need to think about we don't want to see the whole place become a ghost town because everybody that lives here is old, and we all exit. So that would not be a good thing. So we need to provide opportunities for young people, and I think that the notion of having small units in multi-use buildings downtown is a good idea. So having smaller apartments that can enliven our downtown space, so that there are people downtown and going to restaurants and the facilities downtown to keep our downtown more enlivened is a good idea. And those spaces can be both for young people because, hey, they like to go out and party and they want to have that nearby place to go at 10 o'clock to have a drink and go dancing. And maybe us seniors like that too. And some of the seniors may just want to stay at home and have a more quiet time, and maybe we want something a little further out from the downtown. But those two demographics at either end of the scale can be served by some of these smaller opportunities. And so those are the things I was looking at as I was reading our housing document here. But I do want to say one other thing, and that's that I don't think we can't entirely build our way out of the problem of affordable housing. We can try and create more opportunities, we can try and densify downtown, we can try and find house shares, we can do more granny units and all of those things, but the core issue that's going on with the lack of affordable housing really is we're getting pressure from the Bay Area. We're getting pressure from San Francisco, where it costs $4,500 a month to live in a studio. And so the impact is starting in the core and it's moving out towards us. And we can't fix all of that. We can't fix that in Little Sebastopol. We can't fix the economic problems of income disparity and the decline of the middle class. And we'll all have to, as a town of activists, try and work on that issue collectively by electing people at a higher level to try and attack those problems and to try and attack that we need more affordable jobs, not just affordable housing. If you have a decline of wage scales, then that's a problem. There's not enough housing for people that can afford the housing. So I think we have to look, we can't have to know we can't do everything to fix the problem here on our city council and with the great work of our planning department. We have to know that we've got to be active about addressing these other global problems. So that's my 2 cents on that. Probably too much, that was more like a nickel or 25 cents. Such a
Maybe
name.
$1. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll keep it short. I have to admit that I got into this document and wanted to know how to make all these changes and whatever the Kenny did. He said, oh yeah, it's on my staff report. And I read the document, but not the staff report. So I felt a little foolish this afternoon. But then I was so pleasantly surprised that Kenyon, and I assume all involved, the staff in general, came back with such thoughtful responses to our comments last night. Bro. And I'm a firecracker. So, I think that the 3.5 weeks that we waited, that we postponed this conversation for, from the results that we have in this staff report is absolutely worth it. And thank you. I know that I requested this time for us to have this opportunity. I just want to thank everybody for doing that and really having these items here. I was like, I looked at it from the eye of the tiger, but I didn't know. I wasn't quite sure. I only found most of the recommendations in the staff report acceptable. I think that this is about casting out a large net, because we can't solve global warming either, Councilor Glass, but we sure can make an impact and stand as Sebastopol and represent our values on the item and the policies that we set. So I'm really interested, myself in, there's 10 items here. We can spend 10 minutes on each of them, which is 100 minutes, which is over an hour and a half. It's the only item on the agenda this evening, I don't mind. But we might find where, just look maybe first where any council member wants to specifically pull one, and then see what